Hi. Episode, I think it's 10, maybe it's 9 of Sticky Floor Podcast. Requiem, the 1982 Hungarian flick. What a pick out this is. It's set in the 1951, and it's about a man named Pelly who arrives at the door of a woman named Nettie.
Nettie.
Yep, it's about the past love Nanette shared for a woman called Estevan, and she's currently married to a communist defense attorney called Augustin. I think I'm saying that name right. So, team, what's the first thoughts? Blanca, since you're Hungarian, I'll let you go first.
Since it's your choice as well.
Yeah, that was my choice. Thank you for letting me choose. Just a brief historical context behind the whole thing. So after the Second World War, Hungary was under Soviet oppression for several years, for more than 20 years. And we had kind of hybrid communism. It was rather socialism than communism. And at that time, the party leader, the Communist Party leader was Kádár and Rákosi, and they kind of, especially Rákosi, Mátyás Rákosi, especially him, he kind of created a personal cult around him, just like, for instance, Putin. And it was a very black and dark era of Hungary because Hungarian people needed to follow Soviet rules. There were loads of Soviet influence in politics, education, in almost everything, and people were under arrest for actually nothing. Like there were no trials, there were no explanation why they were imprisoned or why they were executed. They were just executed because they were against the party, but it was not the case. So, for instance, your neighbor could call the cop and say to them that I heard him and her talking about something against the Communist Party, and they could just come and arrest you and execute you for no reason without any trial. So no one was friend of anyone. They were living in fear. My grandma and grandpa were already in the world at that time, if it makes sense, and they didn't actually like their life at that time, if it makes sense, because it was influenced by fear. And this movie is about that fear and about this communist oppression.
Cool, nice one.
I actually didn't know it. I figured it was probably set a bit earlier than when it came out, but because there was no on-screen cue, there was no caption, I wasn't 100% sure when it was actually set. So I thought, God, everything does look old-fashioned, and I just thought.
Any other thoughts? What is your first thoughts on the film, Callum?
Honestly, I had a hard time getting into this film. The way, the story is told in a non-chronological sense, and the way it kept jumping back and forth made it very difficult to follow for me. I also, and this is more of a technical issue, because it was a lot of the I'm pretty sure I looked this up. I think the main actress was actually dubbed. Yeah. Because that's the thing. Because there was a lot of ADR in the film. A lot of dialogue was recorded after the time of filming and edited in, and so when there were points where you could hear people's thoughts, it wasn't clear if they were actually saying it right now, in the room, or if they were doing it inside their head. I'm not explaining this very well. My point is, but you know what I mean? Because a lot of the dialogue was recorded after the fact, it wasn't clear when we were hearing people's internal monologues. It wasn't always clear whether it was an internal monologue. And I felt like it dragged a bit. Even though it was only an hour and a half film, it felt quite a bit longer. I think I'd need a second watch just to kind of have a better understanding of it. I did do a bit of research in sort of Hungarian political history just to give me a bit of context for this. But as I said, because it wasn't clear when it was actually set, and there isn't an awful lot of this about this film written online, I wasn't quite sure what was going on or what the sort of, you know, broader political context of it was.
Okay.
Anyway.
Yeah, well, as far as the ADR, I didn't really have a problem with that, but I was listening to it with headphones, so maybe that's why. Simon, I'll come to you. First thoughts?
At first I found it quite hard to get into, but I liked the kind of non-linear storytelling of it. I really enjoyed that aspect. It was, and I didn't like, the dubbing was slightly off-putting at first, but after I kind of just kind of understood what was going on, it was fine. The only big beef with it was the internal monologues, not because I was like confused. I'm not a big fan of that as like idea, and I found it kind of off-putting, and it like lowered the drama, not the drama, but like the stakes slightly, because like I could hear what was going on in their heads. But I thought it was really visually nice. There was some shots that stood out to me that were really like, I was like, oh, I really like that. I like the overall plot, but it was definitely kind of the visuals and like the dialogue that I found like the kind of strongest points of the film. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. I thought it was beautiful. I enjoyed the storytelling. I enjoyed the film in general. I think the only gripe with it would be that some scenes just didn't make sense because I hadn't had the history lesson from Blanca at that point when I watched the movie. But also, just like a couple of things weren't that clear to me. I think this was a film maybe made for Hungarians more than, other people. I don't know if you would agree with that, Blanca.
The thing is, the reason why I chose this film, because this was not the first one, but amongst the first ones that were honored by like foreign festivals, like the Berlin Film Festival, and there was a film festival in UK, and it was mentioned as well as an outstanding production from Hungary from the late 19s. But I do understand why you guys feel that. That's why I kind of chose that, because I was a wee bit curious how you guys interpret it without knowing what was going on in Hungary, because obviously you guys don't need to know because it's not your country and we are not quite in the history.
Yeah.
But still, I feel, but we can talk about it later, but I feel the movie like describes loads of emotions and shows us loads of emotions, and you can still like feel them, if it makes sense, without knowing the historical context. But that's my opinion.
Definitely, yeah. Well, let's just jump into it then. Let's see. Well, the first couple of scenes, the first one was her running and she ends up winning a race. She said something along the lines of, "I saved my energy for the last moments." And then we jump to the hairdressers. She tells a woman to turn off the radio. Then from the hairdressers straight into the doctors, same building, just a couple of feet away from each other. She enters the doctors. What did you guys think about those couple of scenes? Callum, go to you first.
Yeah, I thought they were fine. I wasn't too sure just by the event itself whether she was meant to be a professional athlete or not, but then they talk about that later on. So, yeah, it's fine. Sorry, 2 seconds. Someone is shouting on me.
Okay, well,
And I'm back.
And the doctor said during that, I don't know if she was a doctor or someone that I'm pretty sure she was trying to inspect like the what's her name again? God, Nettie, like a private area. I'm pretty sure that's what was happening. Is that right? Yeah.
Wasn't she giving her a pedicure? It was in a it was in a salon.
I'm not sure if it was waxing or pedicure.
Oh, right. I thought it was like, I thought she went into a doctor's. That's
no. She was.
No,
there were women getting perms.
Yeah, I know that's
Daniel, what do you think a gynecologist is like?
I just thought in Hungary in the 50s that's what happened. But anyway,
in a hair salon.
They had to economise, so you went to a perm and got your bits inspected in the same place. It was it was a tough time.
Anyway, back to the woman who got the pedicure.
Oh
She
my-
ends up getting fired because her husband gets her out of the job, probably because the husband's a bit of a prick, and that seems to be a theme of the movie.
No,
Well-
it's not. It's not. Sorry, it's just quick interrupting. It's not because the husband is a prick. Because the husband was taken by the government,
Yeah.
and he was actually executed because someone accused the husband that he did or said something against the government, which may be true or maybe not true. But this kind of sets up the whole theme of the movie. Like, you can be just dragged away in the middle of the night for no reason because, I don't know, you were given a bad look for somebody and he just called the cops.
Daniel, you made a total arse of describing that opening scene.
Fucking too right, I did. But you know,
Did
I
I?
was asked to host, and I take up the role. So maybe Saima, if you've got any comment on the first couple of scenes, or we can just jump into the one of the main protagonists arriving at the house of her name is Nettie, which you keep forgetting.
I enjoy the first handful of scenes. You kind of begin to get an idea of who the protagonist is, like who she is as a person, what she enjoys. No, I like them, and I like the kind of setup of the kind of environment we were working with. So I thought they were good scenes.
Cool. Well, in that case, your man arrives. He is called Pele, and he's like an ominous character to start off with. He kind of develops throughout it, but Nettie starts to see this person as someone from her past, from the way he holds his fork, and so on. Yeah, what do you guys think of the Pele introduction? No cunt cares, honestly. Doesn't it matter?
Sorry, I was trying to be a gentleman. Yeah, it was fine. Again, this is at the start when the scene is just, I'd say this is the first scene before the flashbacks come in, and they come in quite soon and quite fast, and
They do.
and we also see later on, I know we'll get into this, but we see this scene from his perspective. I think that's a thing throughout that we see the scenes with Pele and Nettie, each from each other's perspective, which was interesting, although the scenes themselves aren't startlingly different, so I'm not quite sure as to what that adds to the film itself. I'm not quite sure. I know I'm jumping ahead a bit, but I think another thing I had, which I don't know if it worked in the film's favour, is that because we keep jumping back to different parts in the timeline, once we come back to the present, I realise, you know what, they haven't actually advanced this any forward. He's still eating his dinner. Like, the two characters haven't got close to each other yet. So
I think that's the point, because she's like, it's kind of like she's stuck in remembering. Like, if we take the flashbacks as a kind of not just like a way of showing like what else was happening, but like as a narrative tool, it shows that our character is still very much stuck in the past because of what happened to her husband, like our partner, I think.
I think they were married, weren't they?
Married. I like that it's like, you know, we go through a journey in these kind of flashbacks and then we come back and he's still like eating away. But this is when the kind of internal monologue starts happening. For some reason, I just didn't like it. Like, I don't know why, and I can't really verbalize like my kind of problem with it, but I found it very off-putting and it almost took me out of the scene. Maybe it was to do with like how the audio was done or something, but it was like, it was a bit hammy. Yeah, it was a bit hammy and on the nose compared to the rest of the film. And I feel like it didn't contrast well, but yeah, that's
Difference between it's kind of a cultural difference, if I can say that, if it's not offensive, because in Hungary, like, you guys in Western Europe, you guys are huge and great with movies, and you guys were huge and great with movies in the past as well. But in Hungary, filmmaking and movie genre is not as huge as theater, and movies and films tend to be quite theatrical still. And I think with these internal monologues, you know what I mean? It's kind of a theatrical aspect when someone goes on stage and say blah 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 blah, blah, like kind of describing his emotions and feelings. And I think, I'm not saying I liked it, but I think there's like, it's just because if there's a huge difference between styles, that's why it didn't bother me, but I understand why it bothered you guys a lot.
I was actually going to say that. I was wondering if this was just in the performances and the way the lines were delivered. It did feel like a stage play at points. So I was actually wondering if maybe it's adapted from a stage play.
No, it's just the way how movies were made, especially in Hungary. I'm not saying Eastern Europe because I don't know about Polish people or Russian people or the other ones, but in Hungary for long time we didn't really make movies like they were actually movies. They were like the hybrid baby of filmmaking and theater, which is interesting in a sense, but it's a genre that not everyone likes, and it's not like a popular thing, I think, especially nowadays.
Right, I didn't have that like sense at all. I felt that it was pretty grounded in terms of performances and the way they delivered their lines. Like, it's funny as they're saying that, because I've oftentimes felt that the films coming out of the Scottish industry in terms of film now are very much like what you're describing, of a mix between theatre actors going into the film industry and delivering these, you know, outlandish and, you know, exaggerated versions of themselves. I
Give an
felt
example.
Get Duped was a new one that came out recently.
That's a very good example. It's because the way Scottish actors are trained, they're trained not even for theatre, they're trained for cruise ship liners, that level of entertainment. Like, because it's to do with how Creative Scotland operates and how the industry is like, it doesn't even prioritise Scottish talent in the way it educates actors. So people are given this kind of like, if you look at institutes like GAMPTA and stuff especially, like they're not given a kind of like film training or even TV training. They're given like theatre and cruise line theatre training, which is why so many kind of like more up and coming like Scottish actors are kind of like hammy and kind of like it's kind of, I don't want to say tacky, but it's like tacky. I can't find a better word.
Yeah, me and Blanca have actually talked a bit about this. Blanca, as an acting student in Scotland, I would love to hear your thoughts on this.
The weird thing that when I moved here, I didn't really understand what's the difference between theater acting and film acting. Like, I thought it's just the same. You go there and you monologue, you know, but it's not. I think the huge difference that everyone needs to understand, and I was told this by my new tutor, Brian Ferguson. He was in Peaky Blinders as well. Oh, I still love him. For the first time, that theater acting is expressing yourself and just pushing everything out to the audience, and filmmaking is like, film acting is rather being inside and dragging the audience inside, and that's a huge difference. And not a lot of places and not a lot of tutors emphasize that to acting students, and I think that's not good. Like, because there's a huge gap between them, and I think every actor needs to understand and needs to be aware of these two different styles, so they can decide what they want to do in the future. I'm not saying if you decide doing theater you cannot do film, but it's like, it's two totally different techniques and you need to utilize both of them.
Yeah, I would say, just from my experience from working with actors, student actors in Glasgow, one thing that I've noticed is just the way that in theatre and in plays you're on a stage and people are looking at you, and you need to really, like, you know, put your body out there so that they can see you, because you're just a small person on a stage at that point. However, in film it is much more subtle, and I feel that's something that is lacked. But anyway, back to the film. We get our first couple of flashbacks, and they are the big man Pele meets Hanover, Istvan, and the prison, and then there is like, I don't know how what word you would use to describe it, but Nettie is then nude on a beach running. Just another wee flashback.
Oh, Blanca, can I ask a question? So,
Yeah.
the main character's dead husband, Hanover Estvan, but they call him Pista throughout it as well. Can you explain that?
Yeah, because in Hungary we say the names in a different way. So Hanover is basically the family name. Istvan is the name of the first name of the person. So you guys would say Istvan Hanover, Gyula Palla, Netti, someone.
Oh no.
And then Pista is
right.
a nickname for Istvan.
All right, is it just like an abbreviation sort of thing?
Yeah, but we call almost every Istvan Pista. Because it's like, if you're friends with an Istvan, you call him Pista.
Right.
Well, on those two flashbacks, the first one, I believe that your man Istvan was just talking about Nettie's body and how much they missed it because Pele was actually a virgin. I'm pretty sure he said that. And then we cut to her breasts and her running on the lake. One thing I've found is that European films, excluding UK, when there's nudity, it just feels so much more relaxed and like so much more normalized. It's not like a big deal. But seeing like Hollywood or like Scottish or English films, it feels like a big deal when a character is nude.
I think the reason that British cinema has a kind of more like sexualized view of nudity as well is because we have been kind of Americanized in a certain way to their kind of like understanding of what nudity is, whereas like most European cinema, at least from what I've seen, doesn't have that kind of infiltration. At least that's my perspective on British cinema's kind of like weird relationship with nudity.
Well, in terms of, I mean, there's a kind of dichotomy, and I mean, it's a bit of an old stereotype, but this idea that British people, or more specifically English people, are quite sexually repressed when compared to other European nationalities. Again, like, it's an old stereotype, so I'm not actually making any general statement about British people or English people, but yeah, it's just, I suppose on the continent, there's always this idea that they're a bit more open, they're more sexual, a bit more open, a bit more, what's the word? Up for it. So they're kind of less prudish about this kind of thing.
Yeah.
Especially the French.
Yeah, and also because it was a weird thing, because when I moved here and started the acting course, I was always asked, what am I comfortable with and what not? I was never asked in Hungary. They were just like, you do this because you're an actor. You need to be comfortable with everything. And I think this is a huge cultural difference as well between even British people, Scottish people, or us Hungarian people, that we were never really asked what we want to do on screen. We were just told that we need to do on screen and we needed to make our peace with it. I'm not saying the girl would have been fired because if she didn't want to do nudity, but I don't really think that there's any actors in Hungary who would say no. Like, I have seen several plays live in the theater when an actress just lifted her shirt, there was boobies there, and it was all right. Everyone was just like, cool, boobies. And I kind of feel like here people would be like, ooh, this is new, this is contemporary, you know what I mean?
Definitely. I mean, like, even in like changing rooms in Europe differ from changing rooms in Scotland and all that. It's all like warded off in comparison with Europe. Like, when I've spent time in other countries, it's just like everyone's in the nude and it's fine, you know. And it just kind of fucking annoys me. Like, see, just talking from personal experience, when I've started writing a film, there was one time I wanted to start it with one of the characters being nude at the start, but then I thought, in actuality, that's just not going to work, because it's just going to feel uncomfortable for this Scottish actor that's going to be performing because we're just no used to it. Callum, you're screwing your face up. What do you think of that?
Well, I was going to say, I've never been in a changing room anywhere in the UK, apart from maybe in a swimming baths where it was warded off. It's always been like, it's like the cloakroom at PE. It's always been opened up.
Really?
Yeah. What
What
changing rooms are you talking about?
Like
And what changing rooms have you been in Europe?
and schools. Well, I visit Sweden quite a lot, and it's just more like open. Like you go in a swimming pool, for example. That's the only place I can think of, or like a football area. It's much. For example, let's just say there are the same two changing rooms. This like isn't important at all, right? There's two separate changing rooms. The Scottish people would turn their backs so they wouldn't have to like, be full frontal when they're getting changed in front of other men. Whereas in Sweden, where I've visited, it's been.
All right, that's different. You're talking about how people get undressed. I was talking about how the actual changing rooms are laid out.
I'm not actually talking about how they're getting undressed. I'm just talking about the stigma with nudity in the UK. I'm not caring about how they undress. There is a stigma, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, like again, it really depends. Like I've been in gyms. I don't go to the gym very often, where just nobody cares. Yeah, it's just there.
There are, I think I see Dan's point, because for instance, here at my workplace, there are changing rooms for men and women. And in Hungary, I worked for the same company, for the same department, and we changed in front of each other. Like there were a huge big room, and we had our wee lockers, and that's us. And it was the same in my drama school in Hungary. We had one big changing room, and that was it. Obviously, the boys weren't looking; they weren't like or something like that. But here, we don't even change in front of each other as girls. Like I need to be friends with someone who is Scottish, and then she's willing to talk to me and changing at the same time. But when I moved here, I just started like no, and everyone was looking at me like, ooh, naughty.
Yeah. Anyone get any final points on nudity before we move on?
Not really.
No.
It's just. It's a very repressed culture we live in. I think that's about it.
Not really. So I think we're. I don't know. We've got that naked attraction thing on Channel 4 now.
I mean, that is not.
As if anyone sees that as not like as anything but incredibly scandalous. Like the way that is all for like sensationalism and shock value. That's not us opening up as a culture. That is Channel 4 like trying to shock people.
I mean, it's a step in the right direction, but at the same time, you would get a program like that in France or somewhere like that. But anyway, back to the film. Okay, so we get a couple other flashbacks. Then we've got them kind of getting to know each other a wee bit more. Then we have a flashback, and it's the police coming to the door for Istvan. What is it that Istvan's actually done wrong? I was kind of not all clear on what it is he was, on a run from.
There's a part, like not in the middle of the movie, when they are talking about when Nettie starts arguing with Istvan how he holds the fork. This is the part when Nettie says that you're going to pay for what you have just said. There was like, I don't know, a communist gathering or something. In my imagination, it was a university or something with young people, because he was talking to young people. He mentions that. And he said something like, it's okay to think that the government is not always right because everyone has their own truth. And he just said that. It's not like the government is wrong. It's just like nothing is black and white. That's what he said. And he was arrested because of that.
Thank you for clearing that up. Well, on to then, what would you guys like to talk about next? I mean, we could go scene by scene if you like to, or is there any points you just want to bring up around like the strawberries? Istvan starts getting beaten up a lot more. Callum, are you going to say something? Sorry.
I'm probably jumping ahead a bit, but there was one thing that I found quite confusing, and like I said, because I didn't know when specifically this was set, it was the scene in which I think this is probably back to when Nettie and Pista first met, where she ran away from the police. After they get her and they huckle her, and they find out that she does have her ID and, you know, it doesn't say anything incriminating, the police say to her, "Why did you run? We only hunt Jews and Bolsheviks." And I was confused by that, the Bolshevik bit, because is this before the Soviet was this scene before the Soviet annex of Hungary?
It was set in 1951.
Because that's a flashback.
That's a flashback, yeah. So it's hard. So it was before, like, it was like we were under Soviet oppression, but not all the Soviet ideal, like they were actually betraying each other at the same time. I mean, the Soviets. So different Soviet leaders had different ideas about communism, socialism, and there were the Bolsheviks who had different ideas than the others. And because Kadar was the former leader, was arrested at that time and executed, and Rákosi came. Rákosi had a different idea, but both of them were kind of a dictatorship, but different kind of dictatorship, if it makes sense. So I think Jews is pretty clear because it was after the Second World War, so not everyone realized that being racist towards Jews is still a problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And Bolsheviks are Soviets. So Bolsheviks are Russians, Hungarians, Eastern Europeans, but with different point of view of socialism. But they didn't like them at that time, even though it was socialism as well, like socialist ideologies and stuff like that. They just didn't like them.
Okay, thanks for clearing that up.
Okay, so next scene, we've got your man, the husband. We finally meet him. He is partying with some Germans, and we find out in this scene too that the person that has visited Nettie is also a convicted rapist under the eyes of the law at the time. And the husband decides what's best is to stay at the party, but tell Nettie to give the man some money.
We should clarify that this is our current living husband, not our dead husband.
That is, yeah, true, yeah.
It was a bit annoying that the Germans, when they were speaking German, that wasn't subtitled.
Yeah.
Was that subtitled in the? Is that subtitled when it gets shown in Hungary? No.
No, they kind of assume that we understand because we were allies. This is how we pronounce it, right? Allies during the Second and the First World War as well. Loads of Hungarian were speaking German.
Yeah,
not fluently. It's not like fluently, you know what I mean? But I did understand what he was kind of saying. Not everything, but like chunks of it. And I didn't even realize, because I think because of the German influence and the Russian influence were always on Hungary, we kind of grew up like that, if it makes sense. You know, not my generation, but for instance, my mom's and my grandma's. Yeah.
Okay.
And also that husband, like the current husband, is a lawyer. I think it is mentioned later on, but I think it's worth to mention. He's a lawyer, and he is dealing with like he is getting new papers, new IDs, new passports to the convicted ones after they came out from jail. So he is actually a lawyer. He is the defender of the communist, but at the same time, obviously, he plays on both of the fields. So he's just a very materialistic, he's a good man, but a very materialistic, very money-centered man who is pretending that he agrees with the government, but he doesn't.
Isn't he also a doctor?
Yeah, because he's a lawyer, and I'm not sure if it's the same here, but in Hungary, you are called a doctor if you're a lawyer. So you're a doctor, somebody.
Oh, right, okay. No, it isn't.
There's quite a contrast between the Estvan, because he's obviously someone that kind of loathes the material life and world. So having this reincarnation, I know I'm skipping ahead a wee bit, but the reincarnation of Estvan in a way with, whatever, I forgot his name, the man that comes to visit, Pele,
like the
Yeah.
footballer.
What a contrast.
Yeah, and also I think because of the flashbacks, you can see the true, like, natural love without any house, any, I don't know, money. You know what I mean? They
Yeah.
just enjoy themselves on the island, while Nettie is feeling trapped in that beautiful flat with those beautiful bed and those beautiful jewelries, but she still feels like kind of a prisoner. She doesn't
Yeah.
mention that, but I kind of got it from the context that
Me too.
she was like, when the time when Istvan was arrested, Nettie was put into this prison as well. So they are both in prison and they both died there, just in different places.
Even
Yeah.
like the scene when she's running away for the police, which is really just her, like, you know, about to be incarcerated, there's still this sense of freedom when she's running away for the police because she's still with Estvan.
Yeah. And she does it for them. So she actually mentions that if you sacrifice a lot for the one that you love, it just worth it, because it does, because you know that the loved ones are not going to suffer. And it's a huge contrast that you would do everything to actually, like, save them, but you cannot because of the oppression and because of the government. So there's a, like, that tension in the movie throughout the whole movie when you feel like, you know.
Yes, absolutely. Well, let's skip ahead a wee bit then to when he is starting to get seduced by. Well, actually, what happens first is there's a beach scene. Maybe we should talk about that a bit first. That's definitely my favourite of the entire movie, where she strips and goes for a wee swim in the lake, and Istvan is doesn't seem too happy about it, to be honest. I don't know what you guys thought about that.
Yeah. Sorry, I had a complete blank there. To begin with, he's quite prudish. He's quite, I suppose, repressed is the word, sexually. And then I'm jumping ahead a bit again. I keep saying that, but they have an argument they have an argument at some point when she's nude in front of the rowers.
Yeah.
We never actually see the argument, so we don't see what happens between that and them beginning to make love, as it were.
That's
Do you
interesting.
know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Or I just completely misremembered?
No, I hear you, brother.
No, yeah. Because Jula Bella tells Nettie that he knows that Istvan told him that there were an argument. But I think the reason why we were not shown the argument, because it didn't matter to them. Like, it was just something on the surface. And the more important thing was that Istvan was kind of freed by Nettie at that scene, if it makes sense, that he realized that it doesn't matter if you're ugly or not, or if you're not satisfied with your body or not. Kind of love is love, you know. I know it sounds cliche, but it is what it is. Like, Nettie was just so out there, and she was just like, woo, party time in the water. And this one was sitting there, and he was still thinking about, oh my god, what's gonna happen if someone sees us, or someone is going to watch us and they're going to report it, blah 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 blah. And Nettie was just like, we live only once and we are still, like, under oppression, so mate, go for it, because you never know when they are going to take away you or what's going to happen. So it's a huge contrast, I think. Like, two extremists were there, like the one with the freedom and the other one with the fear.
Oh, something I was wanting to ask was what was the kind of public reaction to this film when it came out? Because I realised, like, this is the early 80s this came out, so that would have been towards the sort of end of Soviet occupation, which was, like most other places, 1989.
1989 was the regime change of Hungary. But before the regime change, I would say like 5-ish, 9 years before the regime change, things started to change already. Literature, poetry, movies, art started to change. Like, people felt that they kind of more allowed to speak freely and more allowed to make art with symbolism. So they didn't say things like that, like this was bad and bad, but it was because it was in 1989. There was a regime change at that time. So after the regime change, everything just came out like, fuck the Russians, fuck the Soviets, it was bad, you know what I mean? So obviously the reaction was quite positive, because people were finally allowed to speak freely about their lives, about what life they were living, what fucking bad life they were living in their own country. So they loved it. And they still love it.
That's good. How old were you when you saw it?
When I first saw it, was 15, 16 maybe at that time. I didn't really realize, I mean, I knew about the history, but I didn't really realize the feeling. And then I saw it for the second time when we were actually studying about this era, the Rákosi and Kádár era. And this was my third time watching it from a very different point of view, because I'm far away from my country. And I feel a great deal of compassion to what happened in the past and what's happening just now with my country. And yeah, so, when you're in it and when you're out from it, it's just two different things.
Okay.
Interesting. Were you going to say something, Callum?
No, that was...
Okay, well, back to the film, we have then the scene contrasting, or not contrasting, but kind of shadowing. There's a lot of similarities between Istvan being seduced to then Pele being seduced, and he begins to open up again, as well, rather. And then, I mean, should I just wrap up the end of the film, because that is basically coming to.
I feel like we should talk about Pele's character.
And also, do you guys want to talk about the prison scenes with Istvan? Because we haven't really mentioned the scenes when he was beaten so savagely.
Yeah.
By the police. Do you guys have any opinion about that, or did you have any feelings?
Again, my main gripe with the film, and I think this is why it needs a second rewatch for me, is the way it kept cutting back. It was hard to get a sense of time and place, because it kept because like I says, the film kept jumping all over the timeline, where this took place in the story and what the significance of it was. And to be honest, a lot of the time I didn't actually know what Pishta was actually talking about, especially when he was making references to literature and poetry, like not knowing the significance of what he was saying, stuff like that. I'm trying to remember the specific, like the scene where he's on the floor and he's talking about the Dr. HJGK or something, I think he was called. Like, I wasn't sure what he was talking about. Like, I don't know what the significance of that is, or what that's a reference to, or how that ties in with what was happening right then and there.
Maybe that's a shame, but I don't know what's the reference either.
Okay.
I've never heard about that poem. I have never heard about that actually work. What he was saying, what I understood from that, the actual Dr. GKAH, somebody was shot by the police, and I think this is very, very true for nowadays, especially in some countries. And from some very progressive countries, there are still police violence. And if you like, I understand that you don't know the historical context of my country, but I think it's still relevant nowadays that the police is still violent towards people for no reason sometimes.
Simon, any thoughts on the prison scenes?
I really enjoyed the prison scenes. I thought it gave an interesting depth to both, like, Nettie and her husband. I thought it was interesting to see that kind of like dynamic between the three prisoners and everything, and like see like how the three of them operated, and the contrast between the two younger men and the older man, who was like quite more embittered but quite mean and harsh in a way. But in the end, when the husband is like on the floor and he's like, it's the older man who cries for the guard. So it's an interesting kind of relationship the three of them have, and to see them in such a confined quarters, and like how that affects you and how it affects like your habits and what you're doing, and like how like seeing that and seeing the prisoners and how they operate versus how much Pele picks up like habits and how like close that can affect things. It was interesting to see. I really like the prison scenes. Following the kind of non-linear timeline wasn't a big problem for me, so I really enjoyed it when we like delved into those parts, because it gives more like cultural context of what's actually happening, whereas the kind of the main timeline is more about like the emotional reaction to that, whereas that's like it kind of goes deeper into what's happening. I found it very interesting.
Mm-hmm. One thing I would say on the non-linear story structure and the character of Estvan, I found myself like struggling to kind of get into the type of person he was from those prison scenes. I don't know if anyone else had that problem. That's just personally what I found, is that I was kind of I just felt a bit detached from his story, and I was a bit numb when he was like thrown in to the prison, or sort of thrown back into his cell, because I was just like, I didn't care, to be honest, about that character. That sounds horrible, sorry, but
Yeah, I think that's possibly a problem I had throughout the film. Again, this just comes back to, I just found it quite difficult to get under the skin of the characters and sort of empathise with them, because obviously I don't empathise with I do empathise with their situation. It's just, I don't know. I didn't have the emotional reaction that you did, Blanca. Like, I didn't really get a feel for that, and it was kind of to the point that I found the development between Nettie and Pelly's relationship, I didn't find that particularly believable. Like, I get what they were doing, but I mean, it's a film and it's fiction, and I have to suspend my disbelief. I just found that relationship and how it developed not very believable, if you know what I mean.
I did. Sorry, I'll let you respond, Blanca, but I found it very believable. On you go.
I was just going to say that, again, like I says, I have to suspend my disbelief, but I just found it quite difficult to. I don't think someone would fall in love with somebody just because they had the mannerisms and had messages of their dead husband.
I think it's more than that. I think it's got something to do with the fact that she's stuck in this marriage with this guy who's like, okay with her being at home with a rapist, or who he thinks at least is a rapist.
I mean, that's the thing.
Is it okay if I just jump in quickly?
Sure.
It's at least from what I believe, she's not fallen in love with him. This film has kind of stated that she's kind of stuck in the past with this, but like she's physically stuck with his husband. That, like, like Blanca said, like the house is a metaphor for a kind of prison-like environment, but she's not in love with Pelly. She hasn't fallen in love with him. It's that infatuation with the past and reliving her years before this man. It's finding a way to get out of that situation, and she sees him as a key. And it's like when when you find someone who reminds you so much to the point where they have the same mannerisms when they're eating, that like as someone who you loved, you will become slightly obsessive about that, because you're like, especially if you feel defined by the past, she's trying to cling to that relationship she had. I don't think it's love. At least personally, that's what I think.
I completely forgot something important I was going to say. The way the plot went from the introduction, from when Perry came to the house, I completely thought what I thought was going to be revealed is that Perry had studied, well, he technically did. Like, he'd heard all these I thought he went to the house with the purpose of sleeping with Nettie. Like, I thought that was what his goal was.
I don't get that at all, but
No. That's what I thought.
But I did think they were going to end up sleeping together.
Oh yeah. It's just that that's what I thought was going to happen. Like, he'd studied Pishta's mannerisms just for this. He heard all these stories about what a great woman she was, and then he went and sought her out deliberately for that reason, just so he could.
Right.
That's where I thought the plot was going to go, but it wasn't, obviously. Like,
I think, sorry, I'll let you speak in a minute, Blanca, sorry. Simon, the point that you made was brilliant, I think, because she ends up not even sleeping with him, and in the end, she doesn't even end up with him. It's more a symbol of the past that kind of releases her from the present. Sorry, Blanca, on you go. Or actually, Simon, you go.
well, she was intending
I was just going to reiterate the point. But that's symbolic in itself, because she can't capture the past. That's like, he not only is like a character, but he is a metaphor in himself for like that life she had before. That's all I was going to say. I'll shut up now.
And also it's because Istvan, like, obviously Gyula Pella is virgin, and we all know that. And Istvan was talking about a lot about Nettie in the prison. It created an image of Nettie in Pelle's, Gyula's mind, if you know what I mean. So from that side, I think Nettie was kind of the perfect woman for Pelle, because he didn't know any other woman, you know what I mean. So that's why he stayed there. He were kind of cling to Nettie, and Nettie was just, I think, desperately searching for something from her late husband. Like, she was keep asking, like, tell me what did he say, what exactly did he say, how did he say that. So I think she was just trying to desperately cling to the past. And when Gyula leaves her as well, Pelle, she realizes that that's it, you cannot live like that, you know. Like, she goes away without the man anyway. She doesn't need to, she has everything, but she goes away. So I think Gyula was just kind of a turning point, Pelle, a turning point to Nettie, and he made her realize that fuck this, fuck it all, you know what I mean. Because you have, I mean, Nettie regained herself with the help of Pelle, Gyula.
Yeah, absolutely. A point on the prison, these were talking about being the home. She's in for that, like, the entire duration of the present day, she's in that house, stuck in that house, and then finally she gets out, and that's the ending. Well, any more points we want to bring up?
Can I just quickly touch on something we haven't really spoken about, is the fact that Pelle and his, like, the fact that he, I don't know, maybe this is like a very like a personal thing, but like, I found it very uncomfortable finding out not only is she a woman alone in the house with a convicted rapist, even though he didn't follow through on the deed. When he's talking about it, and he's like, you know, like how the woman began to insult him, and then he attacked her, and then she started to run away, and he ripped off her clothes. It's not like a major detail, but that, for me, like, seeing a woman kind of being infatuated with this guy because he like is a kind of he kind of represents like her old life, and then finding out he was like essentially an attempted rapist. I think that's an interesting thing as well, because as a woman it made me uncomfortable to see another woman stuck in a house with that man, but also because of her lack of reaction to that, and how that really, I feel like, properly symbolizes like how she doesn't care about who he actually is. Like Blanca said, he is merely like a trigger for her to get out of that situation, because he's like helping her realize that she doesn't want to live there, but she's also like almost defined by her past. And I found it very interesting that she completely disregarded the fact that like what he was in jail for.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Yeah, because
that's
that's
the
one
point.
clear
Yeah.
distinction between him and Pishta, is that Pele's in jail for, not because of the overreach of the state, or he's not a political prisoner like Pishta is. What did you think of that? Because I had the sort of similar reaction to Simon. I just thought, not, I was a bit perturbed. I was a bit perturbed by the fact that she wasn't bothered by, because when he was bluntly said to her, "Oh, I'm a rape. What are you in for?" and he goes, "Rape," and I thought, right, well, we're probably going to find out that it wasn't quite like that, and it wasn't quite like that, but he was still guilty of a crime.
It's weird because when I first watched the movie, I felt the same. I was just like, whoa, he's a rapist. He's not an actual rapist, but he kind of abused a woman in a way. And then for this time, because Natty doesn't care, I don't care either. Like, I didn't care, basically, didn't. Like, I was trying to be focused on Natty's storyline, Natty's feeling, because I was trying to watch the movie without thinking about the historical context, which is hard because I knew the historical context, but I wanted to have a conversation kind of without them, because I was assuming that you guys don't know the historical context, So because Natty doesn't care, I didn't care either. So just now, you guys brought up this fact, and I was like, yeah, that's interesting. But I didn't really care, because I was clinging to Natty's past just as well as Natty was clinging to her past, if it makes sense.
Yeah, I think I had a similar reaction to you, Blanca, but I was concerned, but I was more concerned for the husband just not taking any, he didn't really indicate that he cared that much, other than, but it's the 50s, so maybe it's different then. I don't know. Any other final points, guys?
I have just one wee more that I do realize, and I do understand why it is hard to actually understand the movie without the historical context. But I would encourage everybody who decides to watch it or rewatch it to not to care about that. Care about the facts that care about that. I'm sure you have lost someone. I'm sure you have been in love once in your life. I'm sure you know about police violence. I'm sure you know about the feeling when you're not allowed to say something because it's against the social pressure, And I would encourage everybody to watch the movie from this point of view, because if you watch it from this point of view, the cultural difference and the historical context doesn't really matter at that point, because what matters is that what kind of feelings the movie gives you. And if you concentrate on that, I think it's more enjoyable than just cling on the storyline and the technicalities.
Yeah, I should clarify that not being that clued up on the sort of cultural and historical context of it. Like, I knew I had a rough idea of the history of Hungary just post World War II. So that's not really what I think. It was just more the pacing and the flow of the plot and how it was structured was more why I struggled to get into it.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good point to leave on. So, thanks everyone. Salut.
Just like that.
Unless you've got anything else to add, I mean.
Yeah. Next week, I think it's my turn. It'll be my
I may not
suggestion.
let you have it. I may just give
Why
it
not?
to Simon next week.
Why? You can probably stop recording now. See you guys.